Hi, I'm Lucy from Sew Essential, and today I'm talking about indie versus commercial patterns. Let's get started. Now, I must attribute this video to my lovely husband Ed, who came up with the idea, and I thought actually that's a really good one. I think a lot of people have got a lot of opinions on this, and I put out like a little question on Instagram and asked people, what are your thoughts? And I had loads and loads of really useful and really interesting responses, so thank you to everybody who responded to that, and thanks to Ed for the idea. He'll be cringing that I've mentioned him on the video, but you know, that's what I'm here for, to kind of make him cringe. But anyway, for anyone who doesn't know, an indie pattern company is an independent company that produces sewing patterns. Often it's a single person, an individual designer that's taken their designs, taken them to market, or it can be a very small team, but it's a small independent business. And then the commercial patterns are what we often refer to as the big four, so Simplicity, McCall's, Vogue, Butterick, Burda. We sell all of those patterns on our website, and what was really interesting as well was lots of people were sort of using the term PDF interchangeably with indie, and that made me realise how much people associate PDFs with indie patterns, but actually lots of the indie pattern companies do still print on paper, and we stock loads and loads of those, but we do now have the facility to sell you PDF digital files as well. And we've got the facility to print those off on A0 paper for you as well. But I just thought it was worth mentioning that in case there was any confusion. And yeah, I mean, I think, you know, in terms of the key differences, the overwhelming sort of response really was with regards to the instructions. I think it's really interesting because the market has changed a lot in the 10 or so years that I've been sewing. And way back when I started sewing, people were saying that indie patterns tended to have better, more detailed instructions than the commercial patterns. And people are still saying that, even though I do think the commercial pattern companies have probably improved. And there's certainly certain patterns where you can see they've really put a lot of effort into adding extra details into those instructions. People still feel that the indie pattern companies just give you more detail. Some people like the fact that some of them include colour photographs of the garment actually being made up rather than line drawings. Other people said that sometimes that can be confusing depending on the fabric that's been chosen and that they prefer the line drawings, but generally people felt that the instructions were better. They felt like that the online community and support was better as well. So if you didn't understand something or know how to do something, you could get a response off the company more easily, get support through them, but also that the online sewing community, there's like through the hashtags and things like that, it was easy to sort of speak to other people who'd made the pattern and find more information out that way. And one of the things that I think was really relevant as well was that people felt that it was easier to find sometimes other versions, like what people had made using that pattern, so that you could get a good idea of what it would look like in the type of fabric that you wanted to sew. And I can definitely relate to that. You know, one of the things I will do with patterns very often is go on Instagram and have a look, has anyone else made this before, and see it on different body types, see it in different fabrics, and that always helps me to visualise, you know, what my finished sewing project's going to look like and whether it's like what I want to go for. So yeah, I thought that was interesting as well. A lot of people also felt that where the indie patterns go into a bit more detail, they also give you like extra little tips and things. So for example, I made a True Bias Calvin wrap dress recently, and Kelly had suggested using starch spray on the bias binding, the bias strips that you were using to create the straps. You know, if you're having problems pressing the fabric and getting like a crisp finish on it. And it was such a brilliant tip, and it made a task that would have been really awkward and fiddly super, super easy. And I think it's that sort of level of attention to detail that people were referring to, which can be really helpful. People felt that there were more like videos and sew-alongs, and online support as well for the instructions with the indie patterns. And people felt sometimes that commercial patterns like assumed that you had more basic knowledge. And I think one of the really interesting bit of feedback as well came from a lady that I know through Instagram and through a couple of events. She's a sewing teacher, and she said that she finds the indie patterns are easier for her classes and beginners to understand, because sometimes commercial patterns, like their way of construction, is overly complicated unnecessarily. And I have to agree with that. There are times when I read the instructions and think, well, why does it need to be done that way? That seems like a really complicated way of doing it. Whereas some of the indie brands are really good at making the construction super simple. And my favourite indie pattern company for that, I think Fibre Mood are really good, but I've only made one of their patterns, which I'm wearing now, the Judith bomber jacket. They seemed really good for it, but also the Friday Pattern Company, and they are one of the indie brands that I've made quite a few of their patterns. And she just seems to have such a knack for like taking what could be 7 steps and amalgamating it into 3. And you kind of read how she's told you to put it together, and you're like, that is such a good idea. That is so simple. That is so easy. So yeah, that's something I can definitely relate to. But other people did say as well, obviously between brands, indie patterns, the instructions can kind of vary quite greatly. Whereas with the commercial patterns, you kind of know what to expect. So that can be quite reassuring in a way, because if you're used to using them, you kind of know what to expect. Whereas like if you're trying a new indie brand and you don't like the way the instructions are done, or they're not as you would have expected, that can be a bit of a surprise. So they felt that there was more consistency with the commercial patterns. The next key thing that people talked about was sort of style and the sort of general sort of feel of the patterns, I suppose. And, a lot of people feel that the indie patterns are more contemporary, more modern. But I think actually a lot of the time, I think there are a lot of really contemporary, modern indie patterns. I do agree with that. But I do think with the commercial patterns, a lot of gems are missed because the styling on the pattern packet isn't very good. I genuinely think that. I think, I very often see designs, and I always look at the line drawings on the commercial patterns, because I'll see something and I think the fabric that's been chosen or the way it's been styled on the packet, I think, it's not particularly appealing to me. It's only my opinion. Obviously, it might be really appealing to other people, but it's just my personal sort of thoughts on the matter. But then I'll look at the line drawing and think, well, that is exactly what I wanted to make. That's a beautiful dress, or that's a beautiful blouse. And I think that is my top tip with commercial patterns, is to really see past that styling on the pattern packet, because actually there are a lot of really lovely patterns in their collection. And in terms of the instructions, they're not so archaic that they're impossible to follow. They're not like a vintage pattern where literally there's massive chunks of instructions missed out or anything like that. Yes, they're not quite as good as indie patterns in a lot of examples, but they're not terrible. They are, relatively easy to follow, I find. And when I first started sewing, actually, I sewed mostly commercial patterns. I've sewn more and more indie patterns recently, but certainly at the beginning of my sewing career, I sewed a lot more commercial patterns, and that's probably because back in those days there was a lot more choice from the commercial brands. Whereas now, there is loads and loads of choice of indie patterns. So that's probably changing slightly, and that's probably why I've been making more indie patterns as well. But for me, I just get an idea in my head of what I need in my wardrobe. I sort of think, well, what are the gaps? What are the things that, what are the situations that I'm going to? And I think, I haven't got anything to wear for that. And then I think, well, what sort of thing would I like to make? probably go on Pinterest or have a look on some websites and see what sort of styles that I want to make, and then I start to look for a pattern to make it in. And I never rule anything out. I will look at our indie patterns, I will look at our commercial patterns. It's all about finding the right style for the idea that I've got in mind. And I do think that just generally, like the indie patterns, the styling is a bit better on the pattern packet and stuff. But if you can see past that on the commercial patterns, I feel like there are so many beautiful patterns that just get overlooked completely. I can think of some beautiful dresses that I've made that I could have so easily overlooked, and then when I made it I was so thrilled with it, but it was just the way it was styled on the pattern packet that I felt, you know, didn't draw me to it. People felt, so in terms of like the amount of choice, I think that's changed quite a lot. As I say, when I first started sewing, there was probably lots more choice in the commercial pattern front. Now it's probably even, or perhaps even indie patterns with more and more brands coming out, sort of winning that area possibly. And then it's an interesting one because some people felt that it was more individual to make something from the commercial patterns, because indie patterns, like we were saying previously, you know, they're very prolific on social media, they're very popular, particular patterns come out and everybody makes them. Whereas if you can sort of see past those pattern packets and kind of, you know, have a look and take into consideration the commercial patterns, that perhaps you might end up with something more unique and a bit different, because not so many people are making those, or they're not so widely publicised and marketed, because people felt that the indie patterns generally are sort of better marketed. And also another interesting comment that someone made is that they felt that commercial patterns, you tend to learn a bit more about fit because they tend to be a bit more fitted than indie patterns. I know what they mean. It does seem like there's more, I don't know whether that's because they are more contemporary generally, that there's more oversized garments and things made by indie pattern companies. But yeah, they felt that, you know, if you want to kind of learn fitting, there's more fitted designs in the commercial patterns. The other key area that people mentioned was sizings, and one point that came out of it, which I was like, oh, I never thought about that, probably because it doesn't affect me. But somebody said indie patterns, I think both commercial and indie patterns have got a lot more size inclusive. They've extended their size ranges, which is all really positive. But somebody said, generally, all of the sizes are included in one indie pattern, whereas with the commercial patterns, quite often they'll split the sizing. So they'll do like an 8 to 14 and then a 14 to 24 or something. But if you want to sort of grade between a 14 and a 16, or no, that doesn't work, but you know what I mean. If you want to grade between two of the sizes and that's straddling the two patterns, that can be quite awkward and in theory mean that someone had to buy both. Whereas with the indie patterns, they tend to include all of the sizes within it. Some really size inclusive indie ranges that I can think of off the top of my head. Jarlee are brilliant, Style Arc are brilliant. I love Style Arc patterns anyway, but Style Arc do that splitting of the sizes as well. Yeah, lots and lots of them have extended their size ranges. Tilly and the Buttons, all of these we stock on our website. Some people said that they felt the sizing was more accurate on indie patterns. So commercial patterns, traditionally, people do talk about the fact that they seem to have a lot more ease in them. And I have to say, I agree with that, actually. I do find that generally there isn't so much ease in the indie patterns as the commercial patterns. And other people said, you know, if you find an indie brand that the block's really good for you and like quite close to your body shape and size, that can be great because you can kind of keep going back to that indie brand, especially if you like their style. But then other people said that they thought commercial patterns were better for that. There's more consistency with commercial patterns. I think across the brands it does vary slightly, but you tend to sort of know where you are with the commercial patterns once you've worked out what size you are. Some people commented that they felt the drafting was better on commercial patterns because of the years of industry experience. I have to say, lots of the indie brands that I've sewn with have had fantastic drafting, and the patterns have come together beautifully. But I realised that there could be a lot of variety between different brands, and I've sewn a lot of different indie brands, but I haven't sewn all of them. So, but I have sewn all of the commercial pattern brands, and generally I've sort of found their sizing to be okay. Probably a bit more ease than I would like in them, like I said, and again that can vary between those brands, but once you know where you are on the size charts with the big four, you can kind of stick to that, so that is quite helpful. Some people felt that the grading to plus sizes was better on the indie patterns. I thought that was really interesting to hear. They just felt that it was done better than the commercial patterns when they increased the size range. But I think, like I said at the start, size inclusivity in both indie and commercial patterns has improved massively in recent years, and that's just wonderful because it's making all of those designs, all of those patterns so much more accessible for people, which is great. The other thing people commented on was price. Some people felt that you got more variations these days included with the indie patterns, so they felt like better value. Others felt that the commercial patterns were cheaper and better value. I think it really does depend on the brand. It depends on the format as well. I mean, if you're going to buy digital PDFs, you can get those very, very reasonably priced. Some of the indie patterns we stock on our site are really reasonably priced as well. Probably around about the £10-11 mark for some of them, maybe 13, something like that. But having said that, the commercial patterns, they're in the same sort of ballpark. Some of the indie patterns can be more expensive, more like around the £20 mark. But the other thing with the commercial patterns is we do run half price sales on those sometimes, and when we do those you can be getting sewing patterns for as little as £5 or £6, which in this day and age, what do you get for that sort of money? Not a lot in the UK. So I always think that's really good value for money when that happens. And the other thing is that somebody said, that they felt that I think it really does depend on the brands for the indie patterns, but some people said, some of the indie patterns are more expensive, but I really like to support those small businesses. And I just wanted to say, whether you order an indie pattern or a commercial pattern, if you order it through us, you are supporting a small business. We are a small business, and everything we sell, you are supporting us and helping us with our little dream of our business and all the things that we're trying to achieve, which is essentially get everyone sewing, keep everyone sewing, help everybody enjoy sewing as much as we do. And then the other thing people commented on was the paper. So some of the indie patterns are printed on quite thick, heavy paper, and Team Trace, people who like tracing their patterns, were saying that's easier to trace than the thin tissue paper of the commercial patterns. Other people were saying I like to cut straight into my patterns, which I do, and so therefore the tissue paper was better. Some people felt that they like that heavier, thicker paper because it lasts longer. And then the other thing to mention is what I've discovered recently is the paper that we print our PDFs on kind of sits in between the two, so it's not as heavy and thick as some of the sort of traditional printer paper that some of the indie patterns are printed on, but it's not as flimsy and lightweight as the tissue paper of the commercial patterns as well. It's kind of a really happy medium. And Vicky, who's on our team and made loads of PDF patterns in her time, made one of ours recently and said, oh my word, this is the best paper I've ever used for a PDF pattern. So that was a really nice sort of reassuring bit of feedback as well. But yeah, that was another thing that people sort of considered when they were weighing up the two different types of patterns. So my thoughts on all of this are that I don't ever rule anything out. I don't ever rule a commercial or an indie pattern out. I just think about, what do I want to make? What do I need in my wardrobe? And then I start looking for the pattern and I go from there. And I'm always open-minded. I'm always happy to try different brands. I recently made a Made by Ray pattern. I made the Rose pants and I absolutely adore them. Like, they are just so fantastic. And I feel like I've made some really lovely discoveries by being open-minded, trying different brands. You know, you pick up and learn different things by doing that, I think. And I just love the variety of it. I love having that variety. I love all the creative possibilities. I love all of the learning, the different ways of approaching things. Like, for me, using loads of different pattern companies and pattern brands is like one of the exciting things. I love it when I try a new brand, like Made by Ray, and then I tried Fibre Mood recently, and I try it and I'm like, oh wow, these are amazing, because it just opens up all these other opportunities to me. Just keeps making my to-sew list get bigger, obviously, which you know, is always going to be an issue. But yeah, I love the variety. I love trying different things. I think, you know, in terms of the commercial patterns, I feel like they get a bit of a rough press sometimes, and I think, like I said earlier in the video, for me it's all about seeing past what's on that pattern packet, having a look on Instagram, seeing if other people have made it, because often you will find commercial patterns on there that people have made as well, and looking at those line drawings and you know, using that as your sort of guide, because otherwise you can overlook some really, really beautiful designs. And then I think I used to think that commercial patterns were a bit more unique and a bit different, because there was a phase sort of 10 years ago where it felt like the indie pattern companies, one person would design a certain type of garment and then everybody else would make the same sort of pattern. But I think that was just due to the sort of infancy of the market at that time. I think it was a really lovely time where lots of people were starting out in this exciting new world of, you know, contemporary sewing. Things had changed quite dramatically. It suddenly had this revival and people were learning and feeling their way. But I feel like the indie pattern part of the market has massively sort of matured now and grown, and you know, I don't feel so much like there is that like domino effect of everybody releasing a variation of the same thing. It does feel like there's lots of different styles and variations and design details and things. But again, I do think the commercial patterns are really good at doing that. I think they're really good at coming up with quirky little design details that you might miss if you just look at the pattern packet and it's badly styled. But if you look at the line drawing, you might think, oh, that's a really nice idea. That's really clever. So yeah, I'm, you know, not a diehard in either respect. I just love all of them. And I thought I would just do a bit of an audit, as I say, of, I look back over like the last couple of years, maybe a bit longer, at what I'd made, because I thought it'd be really interesting to look at the stats. So I looked at 59 garments that I'd reviewed on my YouTube channel, and 37% of them were indie patterns and 63% were commercial. So it was about 2/3 commercial, 1/3 indie. But what I did notice, like I said to you at the start of my sewing journey, I made a lot more commercial patterns, and then in the last couple of years it's been more of an even split between the two. And I think this is because of, you know, that market maturing, like more brands coming on, you know, just more designs, like just more choice, like all of those things. And it's been wonderful to see, yeah, I just really enjoy it. So I've picked out my favourite commercial and indie dresses and tops from that. So my favourite commercial dresses were New Look 6696, which was an absolutely stunning pattern. I loved making it. I made it for my friend's wedding, so it was a really special dress. I thought I want to make it really beautifully. It's a very simple bodice at the front, very fitted, sleeveless design with a high round neck, and then it had it wasn't a straight skirt. It was sort of partially flared but very subtle, and it had a slit at one of the thighs, and then at the back it had like a cutout at the top and a cutout at the bottom, so the bottom of the back was cut out. And I just absolutely adored that dress. I lined it, I made it in this beautiful Riccardi viscose twill fabric, I think it was Riccardi viscose or something, and then I lined it with our stretch lining, which is a really nice soft option that's not so stiff and formal as some of the like polyester or woven linings that you could use. And yeah, I just absolutely adored that dress. I adored the fit that I got from it. I loved wearing it. It was just so special. So that I'll always remember that dress and I'll always have it in my wardrobe. And then the other one that I loved making was Vogue 9344. I made this twice. So I used the crew neck bodice to create a crew neck short sleeve dress with a tiered skirt on it, and I made it in like this pink and black animal print fabric. And I remember wearing that the first night of my 40th birthday party. There was a big crowd of us, went away for a weekend. And I remember Lauren, one of my friends, saying, "Oh, where did you get your dress from?" And she was like, "Oh my God, you made it. It looks like it's from Whistles." And I was like, I can die happy. Somebody thought this dress was from Whistles. For you in the US, Whistles is a lovely sort of high-end high street store here in the UK. But yeah, I made that. And then the other version I made was for the second night that we were there. And that was the V-neck crossover front version. And that had like the skirt that came with the pattern, and I made it in like a really psychedelic silk crepe de chine fabric lined with our lovely soft stretch lining again. And it was because we had a 70s theme on the second night. And I just loved that Vogue pattern because, again, I just felt the fit was great. It was just drafted beautifully. I just absolutely loved it. So yeah, they're my favourite commercial dress patterns that I've made. In terms of tops, commercial patterns, Butterick 6801. This is an absolute prime example of what I'm talking about, the styling on the packet. Personally, the styling on the packet does not appeal to me. It doesn't make me sit up and look at that pattern. But I had an idea in my head of what I wanted to make, and I came across that pattern, looked at the line drawings and thought, I think I can adapt this to be what I want it to be. And I made a really lovely linen viscose blouse. I did add a little ruffle around the neck and a little ruffle on the back yoke, but that was one of the most popular things I've ever made. People went crazy for that pattern and the fabric. I've still got that blouse. I still wear it all the time. And that was like years ago that I made that. So yeah, that was a prime example of, there's these gems that you could so easily miss. And then in terms of indie dresses, there's two that I love. Well, there's three I wanted to include, but I think I'm going to have to wrap this video up because I'm talking a lot. But you will have all seen me talk about these before. One is the Tessuti Lois dress, which is just the epitome of chic, understated elegance. It's just beautiful. It's got really clever construction details. It's got a zip it's sewn into a dart, which was a joy to learn how to do. It just hangs beautifully over your body. It's not overly fitted. It's comfortable to wear. I can dress it up and feel special in it, but I can equally wear it with flat shoes and wear it every day in the summer. I just love that pattern. I adore it. I love Tessuti patterns, and yeah, we stock all their patterns on our site. Absolutely beautiful. And then the other all-time favourite, which I know you've all seen and heard me talk about many, many times, is the Style Arc Bell dress, which has got like a fitted flat waistband piece at the front, a shirred panel at the back, so it makes it lovely and easy for fitting. It's got loads of pretty design details on it. It's just really feminine. It just feels really comfortable. I just love wearing that dress. I've made that twice. I would make another 10 if I had the time, because I do absolutely adore that dress. And then in terms of tops on the indie front, there's two patterns that I want to mention. One is the patina blouse, which I absolutely love. It's got a lovely long pointed collar. It's got a yoke at the back. It's an oversized fit, so you really don't have to worry about fitting. It's just all about the construction. It's a Friday Pattern Company pattern, so lovely, easy construction details. And my only bugbear with that pattern, if I made that again, I would lengthen the sleeves because I've got really long arms and I felt that the sleeves ended up being a bit short for me, but I really love that blouse. I think it's gorgeous. And then the other one that I want to mention is the True Bias Roscoe blouse, which is a super simple sew. It's again oversized, like I tuck it into my jeans so that I've still got like a fitted waist, but you don't have to worry about the fit of that pattern. It's just got a really simple little tie and a V opening at the front. It's gathered around the neckline. I think it's like a raglan sleeve, so just so easy to fit and something you can whip up very quickly, but really cute. Definitely got like bohemian vibes, and I just absolutely love that as well. So I feel like I've basically sat here for like a very long time, waxing lyrical and talking about how much I love sewing and like all the things I've tried. But for me, that's what this is all about. And I love bringing that to you. Like I speak to so many of you on the phone, or I get emails from you saying, you know, oh yeah, I've used your tutorials, or thanks for the ideas, or whatever. And when I get that feedback and I hear that and I know I'm projecting this out there, it just makes me really happy, because I think there's such a lot of difficult things going on in the world at the moment, and if people can find like a sanctuary and somewhere that they can kind of find some peace and some joy and, you know, yeah, just find the joy through sewing. I just think it's such a beautiful thing. So thank you so much for everybody who watches my videos, engages with me, listens to me whittering on. I do apologise. I feel like this has been a really long video. But do tell me in the comments what your thoughts are as well. I would love to hear from you. If you like what you see today, please like and subscribe, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.